So when we think about the nature and scope of the B2B market, it consists of organizations that buy goods and services to make other goods, right? So maybe I want to make um, journals for people. Maybe I want to make journals people for people, and I need the material to make journals. So maybe I'm buying paper. Maybe I'm buying whatever kind of sticky things that they use to make the pages stick together. On the other hand, maybe you're like me, you collect Barbie dolls, and you're thinking about starting your own business around Barbie dolls, right? And so maybe you need Barbie dolls, or maybe you need craft material to do so, right? They resell to business users or to consumers, right? So, a part of the B2B market would be somewhere like Walmart, right? They sell to consumers. On the other hand, another kind of organization that would fall under the umbrella of the business or B2B market would be Sam's Club, which is a wholesaler. What's interesting about Sam's Club is that it sells to both. It sells to business users and it sells to consumers, as does Costco, right? So working for Philip Morris, one of the things that I knew is that smaller organizations that sell cigarettes, small tobacco stores, small gas stations, stuff like this, they actually get their cigarettes from Sam's Club or Walmart. But, or Sam's Club or Costco. They also get a lot of the things they sell in their store. When you buy your chips, when you buy your cookies, your candy, a lot of that came from Costco. If they have some kind of hot food service, or Sam's Club, excuse me, if they have some kind of hot food service, they might have gotten it from Sam's Club or Costco. Costco actually just opened a business center here in Michigan, close to Detroit. And I know I'm a Costco member. They send emails all the time. With my Costco card, I can also go to their business center, right? A lot of people who have their own little independent stores, they actually will get the cashback cards at Costco or Sam's Club for that cashback benefit because it's helpful because they buy so much of their so many of their goods there. Um, or B2B can refer to organizations that purchase products that are used in the operations of the organization. And that could be anything, right? It could be, where do we get our light bulbs from? Where do we get our hand sanitizer from? Who cleans our rugs? Who comes in and replaces the tiles on our floor? All of these things can fall under the scope of a B2B market. Things to remember about the B2B market is that the B2B market is significant but unnoticed. It's largely behind the scenes. You don't hear people talk about it that much, but it is significant in terms of the number of firms involved, which I'll talk about, I think, in the next slide, and in terms of the huge sales volume. Most of the buying that's being done is being done by organizations. They just outclass consumers because they just have so much more money, right? So, Microsoft buying hand sanitizer for their locations is going to be a much bigger deal in terms of kind of the economic impact than me going to Target on a weekend. No matter how much damage I do in Target to my Target card, it's still not going to compete with, let's say, Microsoft. I think this I think this slide is pretty fascinating. So, U.S. economic sectors by number of businesses. You see where kind of real estate and leasing are. You see where construction is, and construction is going to be pretty important when it comes to needing goods and services. Wholesale about 5%, healthcare about 11. So if you are supplying goods to or services to the healthcare industry, it continues to be a growing sector in America. Accommodation and food services about 9%. If you make hotel beds or you make beds, you want to be a company that's supplying beds to Hyatt. You want to be a company that's supplying beds to um, I don't know, MGM and their companies, right? The Ritz. Um, if we look at professional services, scientific services, technological services, they tend to be a huge portion of American business, administrative and waste services. And then, they put in other. The one thing that I want you to take away from this is that I'm going to say this a couple of times when we talk about B2B market. We'll talk about manufacturing Just remember that manufacturing is not nearly as big of an industry as it was, in its heyday, right? America really revolves around services. And because of that, goods often come from elsewhere. And that's not just true for me and the goods and the services that I buy, but it's also true for B2B buyers. Okay, so to break this down and get a little bit more granular, which, I love being granular, let's look at the components of the B2B market. One, we have business markets, right? So it's manufacturers, agriculture firms, service companies, so on and so forth. We have resellers, companies that sell goods and services produced by other firms, and they don't necessarily do anything to materially change them, which is interesting, right? So we can absolutely say that Costco is a reseller, right? You go to Costco when you buy your household goods. You go to Costco when you buy your body wash or whatever. But we also know that Costco does do a bit of their own manufacturing in terms of, or production at least, when it comes to like the food that they serve behind the counter, right? They are behind their their little pop up shop that they have there that sells food court, and then also like the food that they sell towards the back, right? The salads that they create, stuff like this. Um, so resellers can be wholesalers, they can be brokers, they can be retailers. We also have to acknowledge that the government is a huge part of the B2B market. That includes federal government, state government, local or government, because they purchase goods and services. The government market is the largest in the world. It's the largest market in the world. The United States federal government is the largest customer in this market, right? So think about it. Um, I like to use hand sanitizers because it's just very innocuous. But if you're the U.S. government, you got to buy hand sanitizer from somewhere. Who's manufacturing hand sanitizer, and how do they get your business, right? So the thing about governments is that they often work on contracts. So how do you get a contract to sell hand sanitizer to the U.S. government? And how do you beat out other people who are submitting bids for that contract? Those are things that if you're in the B2B buying space, you need to know. And then we have institutions, which are also important, right? It could be educational institutions, it could be hospitals, right? Either public or private, religious and charitable organizations, trade institutions. All of these are important because remember, all of these, whether they are for profit or non-profit, must purchase goods and services to support their activities, right? If you go to a hospital, you'll notice that they have very specific hospital beds. You'll notice that they have these trays that they can push over the bed. A lot of hospitals provide their patients not only with a television but with a television remote. A lot of hospitals have people share a room, and if you're sharing a room, then you need some kind of divider. A lot of hospitals need things like gloves, they need equipment, and you could be a part of a company that sells that to hospitals. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, the institutions tend to work with a lower budget, and they tend to have a somewhat captive audience. Their audience isn't like, let me go and find a new supplier. They're like, just be reliable, be, within our budget, and be consistent, right? And we will stick with you. Okay, so differences between business and consumer buying. For one, there are fewer larger buyers, excuse me. And so they say that roughly 80% of output is sold to perhaps 10 to 15 organizations, which makes sense. Remember that, if you think about the auto industry, right? How many companies in Detroit are third party suppliers to Ford? And they basically only supply Ford. You look at somebody like Goodyear Tires. How many companies do they make tires for? How many companies buy directly from them? It makes sense to do this because, I'll talk a little bit later about why it makes some sense to do this. But this is part of the reason why, if their industry goes, or even that particular manufacturer goes into a recession or kind of has issues, things can be difficult for you. That's why in Detroit people pay so much attention to Ford and their layoffs, or GM and their layoffs, or um, Stellantis and their layoffs, right? So, we know for a fact that Stellantis has been having a hard time. Dealers have been complaining to the company that their products are having difficulty selling. When that happens, it just has this ripple effect. And it's because so many companies only sell to a few large buyers, right? And because they sell to a few large buyers, obviously there are large quantities involved, there are large amounts of money involved. Another difference would be, there's this smaller customer base. And so because you have this smaller customer base, you have a closer supplier customer relationship. So one of the things that happens is that not only are you, expected to be maybe a little bit more friendly than, Target is with me, right, as a consumer, you also will see that suppliers will personalize products for companies, right? I talked about, I do believe it was in this class, I talked about how McDonald's, their soda, their Coke is actually slightly sweeter, and it's because the company that they buy their product from, they have them make it slightly sweeter. That's a specialized product that McDonald's wants, and their supplier is willing to give them, right? You also see many buying influences. So it's not just, whether or not, we have extra cash or whether or not our products are selling. It's what's going on in the economy. It's, like I said before, inflation, all of these other things. You do have geographically concentrated buyers. So for years, and I mean years, more than half of U.S. business buyers have been concentrated in 7 states: New York, California, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Ohio, New Jersey, and drumroll please, Michigan, right? Makes sense, automotives here. So this does reduce selling cost, but it does lead to the need to really monitor things regionally, right? So if you're concentrated in 7 states, but you're selling to many more, right? You need to make sure that you understand what's going on in Washington and North Dakota and South Dakota and all these other places, because you're not there, you're not boots on the ground. And so you make sure you really need to monitor that. And then direct purchasing is another difference. Business buyers often purchase directly from manufacturers than through intermediaries, right? So I talked about how really small businesses might buy from Sam's Club. They are an intermediary. But if you're a really large business, you're going to buy directly from the manufacturer. So the difference could be that, if you're I don't know, if you sell tobacco products, a lot of small businesses will buy from Sam's Club or Costco because it's just more efficient for them, and because Philip Morris will not sell directly to them. In fact, I think pretty much everybody has to go through a third party. I'm trying to think. I won't say everybody, but a lot of companies, even very large ones, go through intermediaries when it comes to tobacco because of regulation around that. But if you think of other things, right? So if you are if you're the Detroit Police Department, right? You're DPD, and you want to buy vehicles, right? You could be large enough that you just buy them from Ford, right? You don't go through a dealership to buy the vehicles. You just buy them directly from the company because you're large enough to do so. However, if it's me and I want a Ford, I can't just go to Ford and say, let me buy a vehicle. Although that is changing. I think what we're going to see, we've seen some companies do more direct to consumer, car companies do more direct to consumer. I think we're going to see more of that because I think that's something that consumers want. I think that's something that some companies believe will provide some value to consumers. where you can just go online and order a car directly from them. I think that along with hybrid and EV are going to put some pressure on dealerships. And so if you're a dealership, you know, I hope you're reading the tea leaves there. Keeping up with these, continuing on with differences between business and consumer buying, one of the things you'll hear me say throughout this semester is that consumers are not the most rational, because in general, consumers are not the most rational, right? Rationally speaking, I make a list, I go to Target, I should pick up the things on the list. Irrationally, though, I might walk out with, I don't know, $75 worth of stuff that was never on my list, right? Or when I make a decision to buy a house, it might have nothing to do with a lot of the more practical things. It's really how attractive was the house, very non-rational reasons to buy a house. I think some people might argue that in their own way they're rational, but they're not the most rational. Organizational buying may be to specific requirements, right? So where the buyer determine product specifications, like the amount of sugar in a Coke, and sellers tailor their product offerings to meet them. And that's not just kind of the amount of sugar in a Coke. I keep going back to that. But if you're DPD and, you're like, if you're Ford, let me kind of reverse this. If you're Ford and you sell a lot of cars to police departments around the country, right? There could be things that you do for police vehicles that aren't normative with regular vehicles, right? It could be that they come with special lighting, right, available, that they come with a special tint on the windows, so on and so forth, right? Because you're selling to this company or this organization, and these are the specific requirements that they ask. There is a level of there may be, I should say, a level of reciprocity in organizational buying, business buying. So in two different ways. One, some companies may, demand concessions in return for placing the order, right? So I talked about Michael Scott and how he was trying to sell paper to an organization, and the guy was like, okay, fine, we'll buy your paper. You've persuaded me, but you've got to make some concessions here, right? It could be that rather than saying you offer 4 service visits a year, you say, we'll give you 6, or maybe it's a price cut, right? Or it's maybe that they deliver product faster, or there could be a million different things that companies could ask for. Another way is that business buyers will often select suppliers that also buy from them, right? And so if they're like, we need your paper, but we'll only buy from you if you buy our pens, right? So there's some level of reciprocity there. Also, something else that makes a difference is that the people who are making the buying decisions are professionals, right? A lot of times they've had training, so they're trained agents. They have purchasing policies, constraints, requirements, right? They might have to ask for quotes, proposals, contracts, so on and so forth. And this means that, again, you have to provide more detail, you have to provide more technical data, and they have to be able to see that there's an advantage to buy with you versus your competitors. Think about that in the difference between how we buy, right? So people laugh at me. I've purchased a house once, a home. When I lived in Kansas City, I purchased a home. And when it was time to buy, when I made the decision to buy a home, I went and took real estate classes for real estate licensing, not because I wanted to become a real estate agent, but I just felt uncomfortable with a process where the real estate agent would know more than me. Right? Maybe that makes me crazy, but I did it. But that's what we do on a regular basis, right? All the time we make purchases that can, for us, may be large purchases or major decisions. And we don't have a ton of data. We don't have a ton of knowledge. And that's why we might go with some very rational thoughts and requests, and ultimately, go with your gut a lot of times. Other differences between business and consumer buying is derived demand. So the demand for business goods is ultimately derived from the demand for consumer goods, right? And so for this reason, if you are a part of the business buying community, right, whether you're a buyer or seller, you are paying close attention to current and expected economic factors, right? Level of production, investment, interest rates, consumer spending. Think about it. If you are one of these third-party manufacturers and you manufacture windshields and you sell to, let's say, General Motors, if consumers stop buying cars, then General Motors doesn't need windshields, right? And so that derived demand has kind of bitten you. General Motors can do things to kind of stimulate this demand, but there's not much they can do, right? So it's really hard to stimulate demand. You can offer incentives, right? But let's look at today's car market. So cars right now are incredibly expensive across the board. Used cars are insanely expensive. New cars even more so. I think they say something like the average car note is almost $600 right now. Add on insurance, people are paying upwards of $700 for cars every month. But if you're GM, you might say, okay, well, we'll offer an incentive. Well, there's only so big of an incentive they can offer if they're going to pay their employees, if they're going to pay their suppliers, if they're going to pay their CEO, if they're going to make sure that there is profitability and ROI for their shareholders, right? So when they try to hold up the value, there's only so much they can do. Now, you could argue, well, part of the reason cars are so expensive is that companies have just pushed up the price, and this could very well be true to a certain extent. And it's not just, the fact that suppliers have pushed up their price. It's just that automobile makers have pushed up their price. This could be true. I don't know. But I will say that even if it is true, again, they still have to answer to shareholders. And if they were to come out tomorrow and say, we're going to offer the biggest incentive we've ever offered, and we're going to slash the price of every car that you see by 15 grand, I'll say this, I think some people would need to be looking for another job. That's what I'll say. You also get this inelastic fluctuating demand, right? So because of derived demand, price elasticity is frequently lower than in consumer markets, right? A lot of companies and manufacturers are not going to be buying more inputs if the price falls, right? So for example, if you're a shoemaker, you might not buy additional leather if the price of leather drops, because you don't have the storage capacity to maintain that leather sitting wherever. You probably practice just-in-time supplier or supplies, right? Meaning that you order product when you need it. You don't have a system in place to hold on to product. You don't want to hold on to product. There's other things you'd like to do with that money. You might want to invest it, so on and so forth. There's other things that your shareholders want you to be doing with that money. Now, that isn't always the case. Now, if you are savvy, or you're in businesses where you don't necessarily have to hold on to it, you might do something a little different. So, for example, when the price of gas goes down, what you'll often see is that airlines will do their best to negotiate what they call futures. So they're not buying gas for their airplanes. What they're buying are contracts that say, in the future, we will buy gas from you for X amount of dollars per gallon or whatever they're using, right? And if you are a shoe manufacturer, you may be able to do the same thing, but not all the time, and often not very frequently. Fluctuating demand. So because a lot of this has to do with how consumer demand goes, you do see this fluctuating demand, right? So a percentage increase in the consumer demarket, in the consumer demarket, or I keep calling it demarket. I think it's because I'm trying a new type of tea and it's got me all over the place. All right, so if you see an increase in consumer demand, it might lead to a much larger increase in, plant operation cost, right? The things that you need to buy for your plant. Maybe you need to buy more gloves, more hats, more, what do you call those? Outfits or uniforms for your people. These kind of things can be true. You also see the negotiation is pretty important in business buying, right? So it's not just, here's our offer. Okay, thank you. There's going to be some give and take there. Organizational selling and buying can be much more risky because it's dependent on so many things, right? It's not just the buyer-seller relationship, it's the economy, much more so than maybe for the average consumer. Because it's not just kind of whether or not the consumer is buying, it's the cost of money, it's all of these other things that are kind of needing to be taken under consideration. And for this reason, business buying and organizational buying oftentimes is more complex, right? I go to Target, I buy whatever. If you're a business buyer, you don't just go to Target and buy whatever, right? You have a lot more channels and a lot more people to talk to. Of concern to business marketers, who are the major decision participants? Who do we need to be talking to? What decisions do they influence, right? When we talk about kind of the decision-making process, we'll talk about the need to evaluate suppliers. We'll talk about, who makes the final decision to actually purchase the product. We'll talk about, how do you determine that you actually need products and what products you need. All of these things are important, and you want to know who's making all of those decisions. What's their level of influence? You may find that you're talking to the person who hits the buy button or says, yeah, go ahead and buy it. But the person who influences them the most is their admin support, maybe even their personal secretary, right? These are the people who go, oh, yeah, this might be a good buy, right? And so you want to know who's important. And then what criteria do they use to evaluate what you're trying to sell? Just my luck, I treat myself to some new tea. Like, oh, starting the school year off right. Try something new. And I don't like it. All right. So, of note to business marketers, companies are making less and buying more. Part of that is that, we see more specialization in the market. We see lower communication costs. We see faster transportation, right? So companies can absolutely use things like just-in-time practices. And they can also rely a lot more on their supply chains. This, of course, does lead to more risk, but companies are doing it. And I think part of it is that they see that this faster turnaround and this making less ourselves really does improve things like return on investment and profit margin. So firms are also under intense quality and time pressures. So they are doing everything they can to reduce cost and improve efficiency. And so for that reason, a lot of times they don't buy and hold inventories, right? Parts or supplies. They're not like, let's say my father. So my father, and I do this to a certain extent myself, but not as bad as my father. If you go to his house at any one time, he has a closet, and the closet is not filled with clothes or anything like that. It is absolutely filled with toilet paper. And this has been since I was a little kid. So not because of COVID. He's just always had this huge supply of toilet paper. And as far as I know, I would say for the last 20 years or so, he's absolutely lived alone. And so it's very bizarre. But, companies aren't going to do that. You're not going to walk into most companies and they just have months, if not a full year of toilet paper sitting somewhere, right? They need toilet paper. They buy it when they need it. And I think that's true for most consumers as well, right? And think about why that's true. I think some of the same things are true for consumers that are true for companies. You don't need to hold on like outside of something abnormal like COVID. You don't need to hold on to a whole year of toilet paper, right? If you need toilet paper, you can drive or walk to the store and get some. Most of us don't live too far from somewhere to get toilet paper. But more importantly, if those aren't options for you, most of us have access to something like Walmart.com or Amazon or Target.com. And because of transportation speed being so much faster, right? Things are so much more convenient. The pricing is not too much. It's about the same as what you would pay in a store, if not cheaper. You don't really there's not a real upside to holding a bunch of product on hand, right? When you can just order it as you need it. But again, that does come with risk. So the other thing, of course, that because firms are using fewer suppliers, they're developing these long-term relationships with these suppliers, right? I mentioned earlier that these customer supplier relationships, customer buyer relationships are really important, and they are. And that has reached, I would say, a new point now where we see companies working together, buyers and sellers working together to do things like develop new products. We see some level of financial support in some cases where you might, loan them money so that they don't go under because you need them to stay where they are, right? I mean, I was going to give an example, but I don't want to be controversial, so I won't give that example. But I will give another example. I think people would be, unless you've actually kind of looked into UPS, I think a lot of people would be very shocked at what UPS provides to the companies they partner with. I think a lot of us are very familiar with this idea that UPS is a delivery service, right? They deliver your products and they partner with places like Amazon. But UPS does so much more than delivery. They also do distribution. They actually will get out and they will be the order pickers. So they have their own warehouses with certain products. So it doesn't really you order it from Amazon, but you might be getting that product shipped to you from a UPS warehouse and not an Amazon warehouse. In some cases, they actually put together products themselves, like they create the product that they're shipping out. So UPS has hired people who are, they're on the distribution line and they're putting stuff together themselves. So UPS is a much more than a transportation company. They really are a solutions-oriented company. You got to give them a lot of credit for that. I think that's part of the reason that FedEx is probably considered more elite, because I don't think FedEx has their hand in as many pies. But if you are UPS, if you are FedEx, I talked about reading the tea leaves a little earlier with car dealerships. If you're UPS, if you're FedEx, you also need to be reading the tea leaves. Amazon, Walmart, these kind of companies, they're trying to figure out drone delivery service. And if 60% of your business is coming from, if not 70% of your business is coming from companies like Amazon and Walmart, and they are, Amazon has had their own delivery drivers as well. They don't have enough. But if they really are able to get this drone thing working, then that undercuts UPS, that undercuts FedEx. You need to be thinking about what your plan B is, or what your next phase of business is, because that's a huge chunk of your business that could be going out of the door.